And most importantly, we have an opportunity to hear from Connie Cevasco, who is going to talk to us about her own experience of the exercises, the gift of prayer, and how that has played out in her life of active discipleship. So Connie, please come forward. We're so excited to hear from you.
Thank you. Well, I'm aware that most of you don't know me. My husband Dan and I recently moved here to be close to our son Corey and Jen, and their 3 boys, Sam, Henry, and Lucas. Those kids you may know. I was surprised to be asked to speak about active discipleship. Why me? Nobody knows me. And what do I have to say to you? So, as with any question that really sits on my heart, I took it to God in my prayer, and I heard God say, "Well, Connie, you are my little one. That is enough. Share how you know me." Growing up in a Catholic family gave me a real strong sense of identity. I learned about God, and I went to Mass and received the sacraments. I learned my prayers. It was a wonderful childhood. But I had a bonus. I had a praying grandmother. We called her Mom, and we used to say that Mom had a hotline to heaven. She was my spiritual mentor. She taught me that there is a vast difference between knowing about God and knowing God. She used her life to teach me faith. Whenever I would call her to ask her to pray for me, she would listen, tell me she would, but she would always tell me, "You know, Connie, you can talk to God yourself. Just tell him what you told me. He will always listen to you." In my early 30s, I felt that my life was perfect. I was married to my best friend. I had 2 great kids, good job, warm home, belonged to an active parish, and I had great friends. And although my life was full, my soul was lonely, afraid. It was shy. It needed something, but I didn't know what it was. Well, God is in the business of giving us what we need, not necessarily what we want. On a visit to Mom's, I was putting away groceries when she came into the kitchen and looked at me. I mean, she really looked at me. She saw me down to that lonely, shy soul. "Well," she said. "Well, what?" I quipped back. "Well." Something mysterious happened in that deep look and that one word. I could feel something shift in me. I sure didn't understand what it was. That night, I was awakened by an unseen presence that filled the room where I had been sleeping. I sat up and felt goosebumps all over my body. We drove home the next day and heard Mom had had a massive stroke the day that we left and died the day after. Like Elijah and Elisha in the Bible, Mom passed her prayer mantle to me before she died. How could I explain what had happened? Who would listen and not think I was crazy? It felt like I had been handed a power tool without any instruction manual, and I didn't want it. What was I supposed to do with prayer? It felt heavy, awkward. I knew prayer worked, but serious, powerful prayer worked best in someone else's hands. What if I prayed incorrectly and hurt someone? Or what if I failed? What if it caused me to change who I was and what I believed? These questions began my journey from believing in God to being an active disciple engaged with God in all parts of my life. I began journaling all my questions. My journaling turned into conversations with God. This practice taught me to listen for God's voice, to capture what my soul heard in the quiet. Active discipleship is often misunderstood as something that will add to our to-do list. I found just the opposite to be true. Becoming an active disciple helped me to let go of a lot of busyness, the to-dos and shoulds that my ego kept presenting, and to learn how to listen to God in silence. True discipleship begins in that inner room where you go and shut the door and pray to our Father. How can we do God's will if we don't take time to listen to Him? I had to find a way to turn off the noise. My priorities started to change, and I started to really read the Bible, to try to listen for God's voice. I made new connections with other women who were asking similar questions. Well, you very rarely find what you don't look for, and I was actively, desperately looking. God honored His promise in Jeremiah 29:12 and 13. You know that familiar voice where we hear Him say, God, I know the plans I have for you. It's followed by a promise. And it says, then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. And you will seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. I will be found by you. I needed to surrender my heart. Life is complicated and full of contradictions. 30 plus years later, I still worry and I still doubt. My ego still makes a list of things that I should do. We all live with contradictions. We feel a certain way and act another. We share the frustrations of failure, but also the driving hope for holiness. These very contradictions teach me humility and to rely on God. Thomas Merton once said, I am thrown into contradictions. To realize this is mercy. To accept it is love. To help others do the same is compassion. It is a process for a lifetime. This is our way to live out that second greatest commandment in today's gospel, to love others as we love ourselves. We must have mercy, and it begins with extending it to ourselves. When we moved to Cincinnati a couple years ago, it was hard to leave the rich friendships and strong, faithful ties that we had developed. When God asked me to leave the familiar and trust Him, I didn't imagine how difficult it would be. But God prepares us. He goes before us. When we arrived at Bellarmine, the community was beginning the spiritual exercises using the book, The Ignatian Adventure. That same opportunity is available now in the parish. Dan and I eagerly signed up to join a group. That small group of souls has been my lifeline through this transition. We have shared life as a small faith-sharing community. I have found acceptance, support, and courage to step out of myself. I know I am not traveling alone. Our parish is encouraging each of us to listen to that still, small voice of the Spirit, and we need one another. There are opportunities every week to plug into the parish-led Examine. No experience is needed, just an open heart. We do not have to travel very far to be an active disciple. We do not need to add to our to-do list. I find opportunities in my relationships with those that I live with day in and day out. This is where God's grace resides. This is the place I can make a difference. Each relationship becomes a channel for God's life to leak out into our world, for me to be a disciple in the midst of what I am already doing. Like my grandmother, I am learning how to use that power tool of prayer she handed to me years ago. It has brought me into the heart of God and allowed me to carry His life in my own. Since the pandemic began, God's still small voice has planted the desire in my heart to begin an intergenerational women's mentoring group here at Bellarmine. Like Mary and Elizabeth, drawing strength and courage from one another during those mysterious pregnancies, we are also called to carry Christ in the world. We are in process, but we are learning together. Active discipleship comes in many shapes and sizes. It is our life offered to God every day. Sometimes it just looks like being a grandmother. How will you allow God's life to come through you?